The first type of sensory nervous tissue that we have to consider are called free nerve endings. And they are everywhere in your body. They're very, very common in so many tissues, and they're really not specific to the types of things that they detect. They have a few things that they can detect, like pain and temperature. We've seen free nerve endings when we looked at skin. This isn't skin here, but as you can see, we've got some epithelial tissue here up in this area of the picture. Here's the epi tissue. And this yellow thing here is a nerve, and we can see that it just has these branching endings that innervate the tissue. So there are lots of these in somatic tissue, which is skeletal muscle and skin to us. There aren't so many of these in your visceral tissue. Like you don't know if your gallbladder hurts right now, but if it hurts a lot, then you'll know. The stuff in your visceral tissue, you're not really all that aware of. So free nerve endings, we say that they are able to detect your general senses. So therefore, they wouldn't do something like sight or smell, which are specific senses. Pain, temperature, those things are general. When we're talking about free nerve endings, which this picture from your book has these free nerve endings here in blue, and look at how they're innervating the epithelial tissue of skin. When we talk about nerve endings, they have what are called receptor fields. And this is an area around which they can detect pain or temperature. So, like, for example, this is the superficial side of skin up top here with the hairs coming out of it. And this free nerve ending might be able to detect pain and temperature in that area. And this free nerve ending might be able to detect pain and temperature in that area. Let's pretend that these are receptor fields on your back. So these receptor fields are very big and they're not very specific. And then you say to somebody, oh, can you scratch my back? And that person starts to scratch your back, but they're doing big scratches compared to how small this area is. And they just for a minute go into the other receptor field. And then you're like, no, 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 down there. No, 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 over there. So these are large fields that somewhat overlap and you can trigger each of them. And that's why you're like, no, 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 over to the left. You have small receptor fields on your hands. And this is why the palms of your hands are very sensitive. So small receptor fields are quite specific. Large receptor fields, which you don't need a lot of sensory detection on your back, they're not specific. Okay, so we've got an idea about free nerve endings, and they do a lot of different things, general senses. Let's get more specific though. There are some nerves in your tissues that have specific endings to them, not just this free branching ending. They have like something specific, a receptor on the end of them. So we're going to classify sensory receptors by their function, not their anatomy. And the first type that we need to know about are nociceptors. There are a couple different nociceptors. In general, they all detect pain. That's what noci means. Nociceptors have large receptor fields, and this is why someone with sciatica might say, the back of my calf, the entirety of it, the back of my leg. Those are very large receptor fields. Depending on what's at the end of the receptor and depending on the fiber that connects it to the brain, you might get sharp versus burning pain. And drugs that work on pain can work on sharp or burning. There is a difference there. Let's look at this for a second. This may look foreign to you, but take a look at some of the things that let's start at the bottom. Here at the bottom, we have nociceptors. Let's cross that out. Let's pretend that this is nociceptors at the bottom here. So we're sensing pain, right? That's our receptor, is a nociceptor. And then this blue neuron right here that seems to enter into the spinal cord, that's our sensory neuron. Yeah, but look, it doesn't travel up the spinal cord. It actually stops in this big mass of gray matter right here. And it seems to synapse or connect with another neuron. And there's actually two synapses. There's another synapse up here in the brain. So we have two synapses and three neurons. This neuron right here, this one right here, is called the ascending tract because it's rising up your spinal cord and it's bringing information upwards or into the brain, right? We're sensing pain, we're bringing it into the central nervous system, and then we're using the spinal cord to bring it up to the brain. Everything in the brain that's conscious stops here at this thing called the thalamus. Everything that's conscious stops here in the brain there. From there, the thalamus is kind of like a telephone operator. It's like, where can I direct your call? And it directs the call to the specific part of the brain that senses what it is. What do I mean? So if you're smelling something, the thalamus directs that to your olfactory sense area. If it's nociceptor in a muscle, the thalamus directs that to the place in your brain that senses skeletal muscle. Okay, so that was nociceptors, and that's how they rise up to the brain. Let's think about thermoceptors. I mean, there's obviously a lot in your skin, right? And there's probably a good amount in your skeletal muscle because you can feel when you're getting hot. But there's actually a lot of thermoreceptors in your liver. Your liver enzymes are very sensitive to temperature. And so there are a lot of thermoreceptors in the visceral tissue of your liver. If you think about like where in the brain the thermoreceptors are, we've talked about this, that the hypothalamus is what does all of those autonomic functions like body temperature, blood pressure, all the things that you're not in control of. Okay, so we did pain, we did temperature. How do you sense, though, chemicals? Carbon dioxide, oxygen, calcium. Those things would be sensed by chemoreceptors, right? Chemical receptor. These are usually unconscious information, like you don't know how much O2 is in your blood, you don't know how much sodium's in your blood, but there are chemoreceptors in different parts of your body. There are some in your brain, there are many in your kidneys. This example here are the chemoreceptors that are on the arteries coming from the heart. So there are these ones called aortic bodies, and those are chemoreceptors that basically look at the blood that's going to the rest of the body. There are these carotid bodies, and look at them. They're sensing the blood that's going to the rest of the brain. So chemoreceptors are strategically placed around your body in order to sense chemicals at an important point. The next group of receptors has a couple subgroups. So in general, there's a group called mechanoreceptors, and they can sense things like stretch, compression, pressure. So let's think about baroreceptors. Baro, like barometer, means pressure. And the first thing you think of course, is your blood pressure. Yes. And look, the baroreceptors on this picture, they're actually pretty much at the same place that the chemoreceptors are. It's important for you to be monitoring the blood that goes both to your brain and to the rest of the body. So baroreceptors monitor pressure, and they can also be in things like the bladder, right? Elastic tissue. The bladder is a stretchy organ, and when it stretches as much as it can, it sends a signal to the brain that says, I'm full. The other kind of mechanoreceptor, that senses mechanical movement, are ones called proprioceptors or proprioceptors. So this is about balance and position. So baroreceptor is about pressure. Proprior is more about the position of the joints and articulations. So I like this picture of this guy down here with headphones on that's probably driving a car, but his hip is flexed, his knee is flexed, and proprioceptors in these areas say that this articulation is flexed or extended or in a relaxed area. You generally have these in tendons and ligaments. I mean, think about it. As you bend your knee, the ligaments that connect the large tendons, that connect the large muscles to the knee, are experiencing forces of stretch. These are a lot of these are in the large muscles of your thighs. Oh, and they also tell skeletal muscle contraction. The last type of mechanoreceptor is about sensing something really outside of the body. And these are called tactile receptors. You have a lot of these in your hands. Baro and proprio were really about sensing things inside the body. Tactile receptors, as you can see here, there are many of them in the dermis because the dermis is innervated. Look, you can also see free endings here in the dermis, right? So tactile receptors, there are different ones for different purposes. And they all have different names. Like this one up here, Meissner's corpuscle, senses light touch. That's why it's up near the superficial aspect of the skin. This one, Pacinian, senses very deep touch. So this would be, Meissner's is like caressing, would sense that. Pacinian wouldn't sense a caress, but it would sense like a pinch. These are tactile receptors. They're very specific in what kind of touch they sense. And that's why they have these corpuscles on the end of them. It's just a very specific ending, and it makes that nerve very specific to what it senses. And again, they are all in the dermis.